Hello, my name is Mike Usrey, and we are doing our FM Live today about gear oil. So I'm going to talk about transmissions, differentials, fluids, maintenance, that kind of thing. I'm going to try to cover a lot of the basics, kind of without maybe a little bit of preface. I'll say that we are going to mainly be talking about transmissions with physical gears, not necessarily planetary gears. So you automatic transmission loving people out there, unfortunately, I'm not going to be talking much about those transmissions today. It's mainly going to be about the manual transmissions that came in the Miatas, mostly because this is going to be the kind of work that you can probably do in your own garage, whereas if you're doing an automatic transmission, most folks are likely going to need to take it to a shop that has a special tool to be able to flush fluid and add new fluid. So most folks, ourselves included, don't have that tool to be able to use on autos, so we're going to cover mostly manual transmissions and differentials since they're very basic in their function and how to maintain and service them. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with this topic. Again, it's about gear oil, and that kind of covers a wide range of potential topics here, but specifically, again, manual transmissions and differentials. And in these cars, they do take different fluids. So let's start off by asking, what kind of fluids are they and what kind of maintenance do I need to worry about with these cars? In general, the 5-speed and 6-speed transmissions in these cars are going to take a few different flavors of transmission fluid, but in general, we typically find that we like these two. These are from Redline, they're MTL and MT90. And I'll talk more about the specs in just a little bit for those. But generally speaking, these transmissions are going to have a little bit of variety between the different weights of oils that they like to use. Mazda actually has specifications that, again, I'll talk about those in just a little bit, but typically we're going to be talking about the MTL, MT90s when it comes to Redline fluids. When it comes to the Mazda specified stuff, there's actually, especially with the newer cars, they have a very specific blend of transmission fluid that they recommend, and even differential fluid too. With the NA and NB 5-speed, 6-speeds, let's start there. We'll just start from the beginning, shall we? That basically Mazda recommends that you use a 75W90, and that fluid is, in this case, most lined up with the MTL Redline fluid. But if you have a different kind of fluid, different brand of fluid, that's okay too. We'll talk about other brands and kind of applications at the end. But these transmissions are pretty straightforward. Basically, Mazda says it should be a GL4 or GL5 style fluid. And if you look on your bottles, generally it'll specify what kind of fluid it is. GL4, GL5 is a standardized fluid formula, you could say. But they need 2 quarts for the transmissions, and Mazda says that you should change your fluid every 4 years or every 60,000 miles, whichever comes sooner. That's a standard maintenance schedule in these guys. If you're driving the car really aggressively, like if this is a car you use for racetrack purposes, autocross, or if this is basically your go abuse the car, maybe you're drifting, I don't know. If you drive it hard, basically, you are going to need to replace your fluid more often than that. And generally speaking, a good rule of thumb, and even the Mazda service manuals talk about basically having that time frame or that mileage. So 2 years or 30,000 miles if you are driving the car hard. Now, the good news about any of this is that if you're not sure when the fluid's last been changed, like say you picked up this car used, you don't know what the previous owner did, and you just wonder, do I need to change the fluid? Probably the safest answer is just go ahead and do it. If you don't have the records, you don't know when it was last changed, if it's overdue, maybe it's not. The safest answer is, for probably less than $50, you can have new fluid in your transmission and know that everything is good to go. That way you can kind of reset the maintenance schedule and know when the next opportunity should be for changing your fluid. The other thing about 5-speed, 6-speeds in the NAs and NBs is that Mazda does specify you can use a heavier weight fluid. So instead of a 75W90, you can actually even use an 80W90 fluid if you need to, specified for, they say, over 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Basically what that means is that if, basically hot weather driving and or probably more like track driving. So that's when we start talking about MT90. It's a heavier weight fluid. It basically holds up better when the transmission gets nice and toasty hot. So you might be picking between these two fluids based on your use case, because of temperature does affect the viscosity of the fluid. And you do want to keep your transmission well lubricated, so that is an important thing to keep in mind. One of the things that we get asked about quite a bit actually is on the 5-speed transmissions for the NAs and NBs. 6-speeds don't have to worry about this, but the 5-speeds in particular, there's actually a reservoir of fluid in the shift turret. So not only does your shift lever poke down in there and it has little bearings or I guess bushings rather, that it moves and slides around on, you do need to add grease to those bearings, but also there is actually a reservoir of fluid that you have to fill up in here. And that fluid, it's the same stuff, GL4, GL5, MTL, MT90 is great for that. But they should have, 80 to 95 milliliters or cubic centimeters if you want to go that way. I apologize that I'm going to be switching back and forth from metric to American, because it's something that basically almost all of the bottles of fluid that you're going to buy on the shelf are usually going to be imperial measurements. But if you're talking like little measurements with a syringe, it's usually going to be in metric. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. Sorry about that. I think that covers our NA/NB transmissions. Again, they're pretty straightforward, easy to go with, easy to maintain. Just to kind of show you how you would service these guys. This is a 5-speed, of course. You can tell because it has this kind of smooth sections of the case in between the ribs. The 6-speeds actually have a ton of these extra ribs and they go in both directions. So visually they're pretty identifiable. But on these transmissions, you have a fill plug and you have a drain plug. So these guys, this is how you would actually get to the fluid, drain out the old stuff, add the new stuff. I will let you know as a pro tip, oh, where are my tools? There they are. You will need just some basic hand tools. Basically, I usually use a shallow 24 millimeter socket and a wrench, and then either a 14 or a 15 millimeter open end wrench. And I say either because there's a trick to these 5-speeds. You can see that the fill plug here is a square shape. It's a little bit odd. You might be looking at that thinking, well, why didn't they just use a regular bolt head? It's a good question. I don't actually know the official answer, but I do know that if you can, if your plug isn't messed up, you can use a 14 millimeter wrench. That fits pretty well. Or if your plug is a little bit messed up, or say that you just want a little bit nicer, more snug fit, you can use the 15 as long as it's a 12-point boxed end wrench or a 12-point socket, and that will actually fit on there. It's really pretty snug, but if you give it a couple taps to fit it on there, that gives you a pretty positive engagement to be able to get a lot of torque on that. So if it is a little stripped, you might try a 15. But basically, I always loosen the fill plug first. Why is that? Well, if you loosen your drain plug and you lose all your fluid, and then you can't reach this, or it's already boogered up by the previous owner, or whatever, and you can't get that fill plug out, now your transmission doesn't have fluid, and that's kind of a bad day. So always loosen your fill plug first, make sure you can get that guy out. And then down here, the drain plug, that's what you need the 24 for. The 24 to use for. But if you just make sure you've got a good seat on that guy, can't even see what I'm doing, there it is, hey. But that's all you need, 24 millimeter socket. Make sure you've got good purchase. That bolt head is very shallow, so it's easy to strip off if you're not really lined up. That's pretty much it. Let's move on to the NC and ND transmissions. I don't actually have an NC transmission here with me, so I apologize, but this ND transmission is going to be very, very similar. This is an ND transmission. It is a 6-speed. They're all 6-speeds, at least here in North America. I don't think they came out with a different transmission overseas, did they? Okay, they're all 6-speeds. Anyway, this is an ND. The NC transmissions, they actually have two options, a 5-speed and a 6-speed, similar to the NAs and NBs. The NAs, the 5-speeds actually look remarkably similar to the NA and NB 5-speeds. They kind of have the same, a few ribs here, but smooth areas in between. Overall, the guts of the transmission are also very similar to NAs and NBs. They have very, very similar requirements, if not the same, I recall. They also want you to specify a replacement of 4 years, 60,000 miles for normal maintenance intervals on those guys. 2 quarts of GL4, GL5, 75 W90 for normal stuff, or 80 W90 for hot track day stuff, that kind of thing. So they're basically, you can treat them the same maintenance intervals as the NAs and NBs. I don't have one here, I apologize. We actually don't have a 5-speed NC here in town at all that I'm aware of, but they have a very similar layout with the drain plug and the fill plug. So same. Those ones, I don't know if they have a bolt head on both or not. If they do, it's going to be a 24 millimeter, or if it's a square like this, it's going to be the 14 or 15, depending on how you want to do it. So you can kind of think of it the same thing. They also have a shift turret that you need to fill up with fluid. Again, same stuff, the GL4, GL5, and that one takes a little bit more. It takes 290 to 330 milliliters or cubic centimeters of fluid, so it's got a bigger capacity for that shift turret. The 6-speed transmission is different. It is a totally different design. It looks a little bit more like the 6 speeds in the NBs, where it's really heavily braced. You can see that there's a lot of these ribs going both up and down, left and right across the whole case, so they're visually pretty different. They also have kind of a different top side to them, so if you got a 6-speed, hopefully you know it because you've actually gotten to 6 gear, but if you're just looking at it on the bench, it's pretty different from both of these transmissions. Those ones, they again have a 4-year, 60,000 mile maintenance interval that Mazda recommends for normal service. They do specify, however, GL4 only, and that is because it is a different, actual, like the guts of the transmission are different. They use different bearings, I assume, on the inside bushings, different metal formulations. So GL4 only on those transmissions. 75 W90 again is great for that kind of a transmission. We typically do the same kind of MTL for street use, and maybe go play on the weekends, MT90 for dedicated track use, or just maybe you live in the Sahara, I don't know. It's really hot. If you're getting your transmission that hot, you probably should be using MT90. Otherwise, the 6 speeds in the NCs, very similar to everything else maintenance-wise. They have a little bit of an odd thing about their shift turrets. That the fill capacity that Mazda states for the shift turrets is 80 to 230 milliliters, or cubic centimeters. I don't know why the variance is so big. It is a little odd. I can't explain it. Basically, whenever I fill mine up, I usually just suck all the old stuff out. I don't have one of these off at the moment, but you unbolt the top of these shift turret pieces to lift your shift lever out. I use like a turkey baster, or if you have one of those vacuum brake bleeder setups, those work great to basically suck all the old fluid out, and then you can add new fluid in there. I start on the low end, somewhere around that 80 millimeter or milliliter mark, and see if it's actually filled up to the point where it's getting close to the bottom of that pivot ball, the larger ball on the bottom of your shift lever. As long as it's about that level, I'm okay. If it's not quite that high, then I add a little bit more. You're basically just trying to make sure all of those bushings are lubricated whenever you put the shift lever back in there. If you put in too much, you'll know, because you will bolt this down and then you'll have fluid dribbling all down the side of your transmission. It doesn't hurt anything, but it makes a big mess. So if that happens, that was a little bit too much. NDs. Okay, so ND transmissions, this is where it starts to get a little bit goofy. Basically, again, this is an ND 6-speed transmission. It looks visually very similar. You have a fill plug on the side. You have a drain plug down here on the bottom. They're both 24 millimeters. Again, this is all pretty standard, pretty similar. The weird thing about this, though, is the fluid. Mazda actually, they like to use their proprietary fluid, and they do specify a very specific kind of fluid. Of course, it's their brand. It's called Mazda Long Life Hypoid Gear Oil. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm skipping ahead. Mazda Original Long Life Gear Oil IS. It's a long name to say basically it's Mazda's own special formulation for transmission fluid for these transmissions. They want you to use their oil. It's good stuff, of course, but it's their own brand, so they kind of keep the secret formulation to themselves. Now, if you don't want to use the Mazda stuff, they do specify if you can't get a hold of it that you can use a GL4 liquid fluid in here that is a 75W90 weight transmission oil. So it does have the same basic specs as far as, the fluid requirements as an NC 6-speed transmission, as far as that's concerned. It also takes 2 quarts, just like all of the previous transmissions. Size and capacity wise, they're all very similar that way. They do have a separate reservoir in their turret as well, just like the NA and NB 5 speeds, the NC 6 speeds, and then these ones have a spec of 270 to 310 milliliters. They're all a little different. Same fluid though, of course. Top it off with the Mazda special stuff, or use some GL4 75W90 to be able to do the turret as well. Okay, I think physically we've kind of talked about all of the features of the transmissions, capacities, oil specs, that kind of stuff. Hopefully that is all clear as mud. I know it's a lot of rambling. I'll stop and see, do we need to talk about anything that I haven't covered already? We're good so far? Excellent. Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to briefly talk about differentials, because just like transmissions, differentials have gears in them, so they do use gear oil. Now for differentials, let's see, I'll move these guys down here because that's what we're going to be talking about. Differentials, they have a very similar setup. This is an NA/NB 1.8 style differential. The 1.6s from the earlier cars, even the NCs and NDs, they're going to look a little bit different depending on the platform, but they all have the same basic functionality. They have a fill port and a drain port. And again, fortunately, these are consistent. They have 24 millimeter hex head bolts that hold them in place. So as long as you have that same 24 millimeter socket that I was talking about earlier, you should be able to do these as well. Same pro tip, loosen up your fill plug before you loosen the drain. Same problem. Sometimes I've seen actually quite a few of these where they've been boogered up by previous owners, or shops that were just getting lazy with what tools they wanted to use, whatever, and they'll have boogered one or both of them up. So you might have to get creative with a punch and a mallet or something like that to get them off, and then replace them if that's the case. But these guys are pretty straightforward. Mazda actually specifies, for the most part, NAs through NCs have the same maintenance schedule as the transmissions. So 4 years, 60,000 miles, you should be replacing your fluids. And if you're driving aggressively, 2 years or 30,000 miles. These guys, they do take a different kind of fluid. They do specify a different weight and a different compound or flavor. So these ones, actually, let's talk about the 75W90 first. On these bottles, they have a GL5 indication. Let's see over here on this bottle. And that is important because that is specifically for differential purposes. So you do want to use a GL5. For the NAs and NBs, Mazda specifies is that you need to use a SAE 90 weight. They actually don't specify a dual weight oil, even though nowadays that's pretty typical to have a 75W90 instead of just SAE 90. They also specify you can use an 80W90 or 75W90. Again, we're getting repetitive, so they can get a few different viscosities and still be just fine. We typically recommend a 75W90 for almost every purpose out there. If you're really working your diff hard, you probably want to use a little bit thicker fluid. So if it's a dedicated race car, you have lots of horsepower, that kind of thing, you might go to like an 80W90. They take 1 quart. Actually, generally they take a little bit less than 1 quart, but I'm going to talk in round numbers because you're only going to buy them in quart bottles. These guys are pretty straightforward. NCs, same, 1 quart, GL5, same fluid weights. Generally, we recommend 75W90. The NDs get a little strange though. Their differentials, they look quite a bit different than this. They still have kind of this like T-hanger effect going on for how they're mounted, but they are a smaller and very new ring and pinion setup. They have a very special fluid in them. Mazda actually recommends that you don't need to replace the fluid in your differential for NDs. They say it is a lifetime fluid. It is that Mazda Long Life Hypoid Gear Oil SG1. That's what they call it. So they actually specify the only time you need to replace your gear oil is in your differential is if the car has been submerged, which you probably need to replace a lot of other things at that point too. Practically speaking, if you're racing the car, if you're driving it aggressively, if you have a lot of horsepower, you should probably consider replacing the fluid in your differential. So that way, one, the lifetime fluid, it is good stuff. It should last a normal street-driven Miata that is, well maintained otherwise for the lifetime of the car. But realistically, that fluid will wear out eventually. And the harder you work your differential, the more power you put it through it, the more likely you're going to need to replace that fluid sooner. So if you do power sports, auto sports, track days, whatever kind of stuff, you probably should think about replacing your fluid in your differential about the same time that you do the transmission. You're down there anyway. It's the same basic process to drain and fill the fluid on your diff. It'd be a good time to do it. Make sure that you know that that fluid is good. Now, if you don't want to use the special Mazda fluid, you can use a GL5, 75W85 is what we recommend for street use, and even if you do a little bit of autocross or, a couple track days a year. If you're driving it hard, have lots of horsepower, if it's dedicated track use, that kind of thing, jump up to the 75W90. So it is a slightly different formulation that we recommend for the ND diffs, but otherwise, that's how we treat it. We typically are replacing our differential fluid in the NDs alongside the transmission fluid anytime we need to do a service. So let's go to some of the questions that we got asking about what should I do? What do I need? How do I know that we got in advance of this episode? So one of them is, how do I know if I need to change my gear oil? I kind of touched on this earlier. Basically, if you don't know, it's probably a good plan to go ahead and just set aside some time to make the gear change or the oil change happen. That way you know that you're starting off fresh with clean fluid. The other way you can also tell is that if you've got your car up on jack stands or on a lift, it's nice and level. If you pull your fill plug out, it probably will dribble a little bit out on its own, but you can take your finger, poke it in there, and pull it out to take a look at that oil. If that oil is really dark, if it's really shimmery, like metallic glitter in there especially, it's probably a good time to change that fluid. So if it's nice light colored, some brands like Redline in particular, their oil when it's brand new is actually kind of a little bit of a reddish orangey color. So if you know what fluid is in there, you can tell what it's supposed to be when it's new. But all of the fluids, no matter if they've got tint to them or not, will end up turning dark over time and have a little bit of that glitter in them just from normal wear and tear. So you can check them using the fill plug if you need to. Oh, additives. So one of the things we hadn't talked about yet is transmission or differential additives. There is quite a few of them out there. We like Redline, of course, so we have Shockproof. Shockproof is a gear oil additive. It can be used in conjunction with MTL or MT90. We usually run it as one bottle of one of these two and then one bottle of Shockproof to fill a transmission, and that does really well. Why would we want to do that? Why would you want to have a cocktail of this stuff, and what does it even do? So Shockproof in particular, and a lot of other additives that are like this from other brands, what they generally do is that they will have a really sticky compound in them. That, like, their viscosity is not going to be quite as, it's similar to other transmission fluids, but it's going to have a really sticky factor to it where this is going to be almost a bit gloopy, and it helps it stick to the gears inside the transmission a little bit better. So that way, when the gears are going around and they're meshing with each other, if you hammer it down and you've got a turbo and you're really working that transmission hard and those teeth are really pushing against each other hard, as they do that, they're going to squish out a lot of the transmission oil, especially if it's not a high quality oil, and it's not going to be as protected. You don't want to have direct metal on metal contact as those teeth are going around in your transmission. Just like an engine, you want to have oil between metal surfaces to keep them from wearing down. Shockproof and additives like that, they're real sticky, so even as you've got high power applications where those teeth are pressing together and squishing out that fluid, this sticks better to the gears and sticks between the gears as they're pushing around better to provide more protection even in like high stress, high power applications. So If you have a transmission that you really want to take care of it because you're beating on it on the track, if you have lots of horsepower, you might consider doing, you know, a cocktail of one bottle of MTL, MT90, and a bottle of Shockproof. Another thing is that we had folks asking about this fluid. Well, I have a really old transmission. You know, this is supposed to be sticky stuff. Does it actually help with anything else? It can. If you have an old NA/NB transmission, it's got a lot of miles, maybe it's pretty noisy because the previous owner didn't take good care of it, didn't do their oil changes like they should. This can help coat the gears a little bit more if they're worn down more dramatically than another transmission gear set might be, and help quiet it down a little bit. I wouldn't count on that being a silver bullet, but it can help. So if you've got a noisy transmission, you also might consider doing a cocktail of Shockproof with another one of these and see how it goes. There are other additives out there, but without going down a major rabbit hole, I won't talk about the other kinds of additives out there. One of the things we get asked about a lot is the magic unicorn tears fluid. So Ford makes a transmission fluid that's the Motorcraft Full Synthetic Manual Transmission Fluid XT-M5QS. You can see that the folks that name fluids are very exciting people. They make a good fluid, and basically it's probably common knowledge at this point that unicorn tears is really popular to put in your transmission, whether it be NA and B usually, or even NCs, and I've heard of some folks even putting it in their NDs. It is a very similar fluid to like Redline MTL. It has its own proprietary formulation of additives built in it. It's good stuff. We get questions about, is it worth it? Is it better than Redline? Is it better than X brand, whatever? In our limited amount of testing with it, because we've not done like long-term performance wear and tear kind of tests where we take one transmission that's brand new, run it 100,000 miles with one fluid, and then do the same thing with another fluid. We haven't done that to tear them down to see which one wears more or less. But objectively, between Redline and the unicorn tears, they're both very good fluids. Personally, I've tried them in my NC transmission, and I didn't notice a difference between them. My transmission didn't get magically quieter with one versus the other. So if you're predisposed to Ford flavors of fluid, then by all means, it's good stuff. I've tried it. It does work well. Ooh. And lastly, one of the questions we got in advance, talking about differentials that have limited slip functionality. So that's a good question, actually, because that is a conversation of its own about different fluid weights and additives. On any of the factory differentials, they're generally going to be torsion style or like a conical limited slip where there's interfaces of material or gears that are connecting to be able to provide some level of limited slip functionality. None of the factory setups, except for the early 1.6s that have a separate viscous LSD thing, which we're not going to get too far down the rabbit hole on that one. All of the factory differentials use a very basic fluid, 75W80 or, 85 or 75W90, generally speaking. They don't need anything terribly fancy, but let's say you have a OS Geiken or X brand, whatever aftermarket differential that you swapped in. And so now it's not just a conical LSD or helical LSD. Now it's actually a clutch pack style LSD. Those usually do require a different kind of fluid. It's going to depend quite a bit on your manufacturer. Like the OS Geikens, I think, used like 85W250 or something. It's a vastly different formulation and weight of fluid compared to what the stock one is. So if you have a different aftermarket LSD differential in your car, look up the specs and see what the manufacturer calls out, because it will be different than factory and it may be different from the next aftermarket unit. They're not all the same fluid requirements. Okay, I think that's probably my spiel on this for just the talking parts, unless there's any questions. We do. Okay, what haven't I answered? Yep. Okay, so the question is about automatics, and in particular the NC automatics. The short answer is that we don't have as much experience with the automatics especially the NCs. The ones that we've had here have had pretty low mileage and haven't needed to be serviced or had the fluid flushed. From our limited understanding of them, those transmissions, they are normal, basically like solenoid controlled, fluid passage actuated transmissions, automatic transmissions, like a lot of other automatics on the road. They're not dual clutches or anything, terribly fancy. Mazda may very well say that they are lifetime sealed, can't be serviced transmissions, but they do have pans with gaskets and pickups inside them. So if you wanted to DIY them, just like a lot of other transmissions that are like this, there's a lot of Chevys and Fords that are not serviceable, or at least that's what the factory says. You can still pull the pans off of them, drop what fluid you can, usually replace the filter and the gasket and put it back together. On those transmissions, I don't recall offhand where you would fill it up. A lot of times you have to fill it up through either, if there's a dipstick, that you'd run the fluid down there, or some of them you actually have to pump fluid into a little hideaway hole that's threaded and has a bolt in it to plug it up. But there's not a dipstick for it sometimes. I don't recall which the NC has. Again, I apologize. We haven't needed to look into them. It's not as common as the manual transmissions. Fluid-wise, of course, they do take a different fluid. These would not apply. They take an automatic transmission fluid. It is a different formulation. They're a lot more heavily filled with detergents to help keep all the passageways clean, because it's going through little itty-bitty passageways to move pressurized circuits and open things up, close things down, apply pressure, that kind of thing in different places. So it is a different formulation. Check your service manual to make sure that you're getting the right fluid, but it's going to be labeled as an automatic transmission fluid, not a gear oil. Good question, though. You've installed the lightweight flywheel, and now you have that kind of signature rattle sound that happens whenever you're decelerating in gear. And that can be better or worse depending on the transmission, like how it's been treated, what kind of maintenance you've had over the years. Generally, I notice that the older transmissions usually have more noise because over time they've worn down their gears as they have been meshing over and over and over. And so you'll get more gear lash, because that's what's happening when you have a lightweight flywheel. You have less inertia, so as you're decelerating in gear, instead of keeping constant mesh with those teeth are constantly touching and forcing against the next one, there's a little bit of wobble that happens because it's not actually moving power one way or the other, depending on how steep a decline or incline you're going up as you're decelerating. So can you make that noise less? Can you help reduce it a little bit? Again, with that shockproof or similar kind of additives like this that are more like sticky, tacky stuff, you can make that a little bit better, but it's never really going to go away because you're still going to have that movement of the gears as they are spinning around and basically kind of clattering off each other. That's the noise that you're hearing. So you can make it a little bit better, but I wouldn't count on this being a silver bullet, any kind of additive like this to make that noise go away entirely. That's one of the inherent qualities of a lightweight flywheel, is that it's reducing inertia, and that's why the teeth aren't always in full mesh. Are there any plugs on your transmission that should not be removed? Yes, there are quite a few, actually. So just looking at these transmissions, it's obviously a little easier to see them when they're out here on the bench. There's lots of little bolts and stuff on the side of the transmission. You shouldn't take those out unless you know what you're doing. Any of these kinds of bolts and, case studs and stuff like that, well, not that one, but basically anything else that's not the fill plug or the drain plug, leave them be. There are specific plugs or bolts that they can be used for access to different things, like setting points for the shifter detents on your shift levers that go forward for the forks where they actually engage. There are like these guys that are wiring to be able to have basically a switch to know when the car or within the transmission's in neutral or when it's in reverse. These ones are a little less to worry about, but especially on the NB 6-speeds, which I'm sure is where this question is asking about in particular. If you have a 6-speed and you're wondering about where the fill plug is, remember that it's always, always, always going to be on the left side. Doesn't matter if you have a right-hand drive or left-hand drive car, always going to be on the exhaust side. Over here on the right side of the transmission, there is a little just electrical switch here, but there's also an Allen head bolt plug thing here and a bolt up here. Neither of those should be removed. These are for if you're pulling the transmission apart, rebuilding it, and you know what you're doing. Otherwise, don't touch them. I forget which one it is that's catastrophic, but one of these, I think it's the one with Allen head, if I recall. If you remove that, then essentially it's going to be pulling out a detent for one of the forks, and then I forget which gear it is, but you lose one of your gears, like first or reverse or something like that. And you can't really put it back in there without taking the transmission out and accessing at least some of it by pulling the transmission apart. So if you're not sure, come back or rewind to earlier part of the video where I show you where the fill and the drains are. But do not take out a bolt if you're not absolutely sure what it is, because it might be holding some of the important internal guts of the transmission together, and you don't want to have to pay a shop to rebuild your transmission because you removed a bolt accidentally. I'm sure there's a few people that are watching this now that probably know exactly what that feels like. My apologies or my condolences for those of you that have done that by accident. It's not a fun thing. Good question. I know that we talked about a lot of things here, talked about a lot of specs, a lot of numbers. This is all, of course, something that it's general maintenance. For the most part, it's pretty straightforward. But if you have questions that I didn't answer here in this video, please leave them in the comments below. Even when this is on YouTube, of course, we will try to answer questions and address anything that I didn't cover in this video before. So that's it. That's my spiel for today. I really appreciate your time. Hopefully you learned something. If this is something you'd like to see, of course, give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more in the future. And if there's other topics that you'd like us to cover that maybe you have questions about or just don't know how to do it, drop us a comment down below, and we love suggestions on, what things we can cover in future videos. So, of course, feel free to reach out if you would like to talk to us directly. You can call us, email us, hit us up on social media, all the different methods. We'd love to chat with you. But otherwise, thanks again for watching, and we will see you next time.